The envelope arrived on a Tuesday in November, its edges crisp despite traveling all the way from Cleveland to Sarah Matthews' mailbox in Portland. The return address bore the name of a law firm she'd never heard of, Blackwood, Thorne and Associates. Inside was a letter informing her that her great-aunt Eliza, whom she'd met only once as a child, had passed away, leaving her the old family home in Cleveland. "Who dies and leaves their house to someone they barely know?" Sarah's roommate Jen asked, examining the letter over Sarah's shoulder. "Someone with no one else to leave it to, I guess," Sarah replied. At 32, with mounting student debt and a graphic design job that barely covered her portion of the rent, the inheritance seemed like a bizarre stroke of luck. The attorney's letter mentioned that the property had been in the Matthews family for generations, dating back to the early 1900s. It also stated that Sarah would need to visit Cleveland to sign the paperwork and assess the property. The firm had included a check to cover travel expenses. "Are you actually going to go?" Jen asked. Sarah stared at the check. "I don't really have a choice, do I? Even if I sell it, I need to see it first." 3 days later, Sarah stood on the sidewalk in front of a large Victorian house in Cleveland's historic district. The November air bit at her cheeks as she took in the imposing structure, 3 stories of weathered brick and ornate woodwork, with a wrap-around porch that had seen better days. Dormant ivy clung to the walls, its bare tendrils mapping the brick like veins. Mr. Blackwood, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, stood beside her. "The house has been vacant for about 6 months, since your great-aunt's passing. It's been in your family since 1905, when your great-great-grandfather built it." "I barely remember her," Sarah admitted. "We visited once when I was 7 or 8. "Miss Eliza was a very private person," Mr. Blackwood replied, "especially in her later years." Inside, the house was a time capsule. Heavy velvet curtains, dark wood furniture, the scent of old books and furniture polish hung in the air. Despite the dust covers on most of the furniture, the place had a strange, lived-in feeling, as if someone had just stepped out momentarily. "Everything is included in the inheritance," Mr. Blackwood explained. "Miss Eliza was quite specific that the house and all its contents should pass to you." Sarah wandered through the rooms while Mr. Blackwood reviewed the paperwork. The parlor, the dining room, the kitchen with its antique appliances, all preserved as if the last century had barely touched them. On the wall of the main staircase hung a series of family photographs in ornate frames. Sarah paused at a large portrait from 1908, according to the small brass plate at the bottom of the frame. The photograph showed a family group, men in stiff collars, women in high-necked dresses, children arranged carefully in front. Sarah recognized her great-aunt Eliza as a young girl, her face solemn. Next to her stood a boy who looked strikingly similar to Sarah's father. "That would be your great-grandfather, Thomas," Mr. Blackwood said, appearing at her side. "And yes, the family resemblance is quite strong." Sarah studied the photograph more closely. Something about it felt off, though she couldn't immediately place what. The faces stared back at her with the stiff formality of early photography, when exposure times meant subjects had to hold perfectly still, except Sarah leaned closer. In the back row, slightly out of focus, one of the women's eyes appeared to be closed, or perhaps in the process of blinking. It created an unsettling effect, as if she had moved during the exposure while everyone else remained statue still. "Who's that?" Sarah asked, pointing to the blinking woman. Mr. Blackwood adjusted his glasses. "I believe that would be Eleanor Matthews, your great-great-grandfather's sister. It looks like she's blinking." Early photography required subjects to remain perfectly still for several seconds. "Someone inevitably moved," he said dismissively. "Now, if you'll follow me to the study, we can complete the paperwork." After signing the necessary documents and receiving the keys, Sarah found herself alone in the house. Mr. Blackwood had offered to arrange for a hotel, but Sarah had declined. She'd already decided to spend at least one night in the house to get a feel for the place and determine whether to sell it or keep it. She ordered delivery for dinner and began exploring more thoroughly. The third floor contained several small bedrooms that must have been for servants in the house's early days. The second floor had 4 large bedrooms, including the master suite where her great-aunt had presumably lived. In the master bedroom, Sarah discovered a leather-bound journal in the nightstand drawer. Opening it revealed neat, precise handwriting. The first entry was dated just 3 years earlier. October 15th, 2022. I've begun seeing her again. After all these years, I thought it had stopped. Dr. Miller says it's just my mind playing tricks, that at my age, the line between memory and imagination grows thin. But I know what I see. Eleanor watches from the photograph, and sometimes, when I pass by at night, her eyes are open when they should be closed. Other times closed when they should be open. The dreams have returned as well. Always the same. The hidden room, the crying, the cold. So cold. Sarah's phone buzzed with a notification from the delivery driver, startling her. She set the journal aside and went downstairs to retrieve her food. After eating, Sarah returned to the journal, flipping through more entries. Her great-aunt's writing became increasingly disjointed over time, filled with references to Eleanor watching and movement in the still frame. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before her death, April 30th, 2023. I found the deed, the original blueprints too. There is a room. It wasn't my imagination. All these years, and I finally understand what happened to Eleanor. Why she appears in the photograph when she should have been gone already. Why her eyes sometimes open, sometimes close. She's trying to tell me something, trying to show me, but I'm too afraid to look. God forgive me, I'm too afraid to look. A chill ran up Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with the old house's drafty windows. She closed the journal and placed it back in the drawer. Great-aunt Eliza had clearly been suffering from dementia or some other condition in her final years. The ramblings about a hidden room and a woman in a photograph blinking were just the product of an aging mind. Still, as Sarah prepared for bed in one of the guest rooms, she couldn't bring herself to sleep in her great-aunt's bed. She avoided looking at the family portrait on the staircase. That night, Sarah dreamed of the house. In her dream, she stood before the family portrait, but now she was inside the frame, wearing a high-necked dress from the early 1900s. Everyone around her stood perfectly still, their faces frozen in solemn expressions. Only Sarah could move, could breathe, and from her position inside the photograph, she could see that one person was missing from the group. Eleanor's spot in the back row was empty. Behind her, somewhere in the darkened house beyond the photograph, Sarah heard crying. Soft, muffled sobs that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. She woke with a start at 3:17 a.m., her heart racing. The house creaked and settled around her, its old bones adjusting to the night's cold. Sarah reached for her phone, illuminating the darkness with its blue glow. Just a dream, she told herself, just a strange dream in a strange house. But as she lay back down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with the portrait on the staircase. Something she needed to see. Something about Eleanor's eyes. Morning brought clarity and sunshine streaming through the dusty windows. Sarah laughed at herself for getting spooked by an old journal and a dream. She made coffee in the kitchen, using a French press she'd found in a cupboard, and called her boss to request a few more days off. With the inheritance came decisions about what to do with the house and its contents, and Sarah couldn't rush back to Portland just yet. After breakfast, Sarah decided to examine the family portrait again. In the daylight, the photograph seemed less ominous, just an old family picture, formally posed and slightly faded with age. She studied Eleanor's face, the woman who had appeared to be blinking. Today, both of Eleanor's eyes seemed to be closed, though the image was grainy enough that it was hard to be certain. Sarah took out her phone and snapped a picture of the portrait. She zoomed in on Eleanor's face, but the image was too dark to see clearly. She turned on her flash and took another photo. When she checked the result, she nearly dropped her phone. In the flash photo, Eleanor's eyes were unmistakably open, staring directly at the camera. "It's just a trick of the light," Sarah muttered to herself, looking back at the actual portrait where Eleanor's eyes still appeared closed. She took another photo with the flash. Again, in the digital image, Eleanor's eyes were open. A chill ran through Sarah despite the morning sunlight. She remembered her great-aunt's journal entries about Eleanor watching, about eyes that opened and closed. Ridiculous, she thought. Photos don't change. People in photographs don't blink. Yet the evidence on her phone suggested otherwise. Sarah spent the morning going through the house methodically, opening drawers and cabinets, looking for anything that might explain her great-aunt's journal entries or the strange effect in the photograph. In a roll-top desk in the study, she found a folder containing property documents dating back to the house's construction. Among them was a set of blueprints, yellowed with age. Sarah spread them out on the desk and studied the layout. The plans matched the house as it currently stood, with one exception. On the second floor, between the master bedroom and what was now a bathroom, the blueprint showed a small room that didn't seem to exist in the current layout. Sarah returned to the second floor and examined the wall between the two rooms. According to the blueprint, there should be a door here, or at least evidence of a walled-up entrance. But the wallpaper, though old, showed no signs of patching or alteration. She ran her hands along the wall, tapping occasionally, listening for a hollow sound that might indicate a sealed doorway. Nothing seemed unusual until she reached the baseboards near the floor. There, her fingers detected a slight seam in the wood that didn't follow the natural grain. Sarah pressed against different sections of the baseboard until she heard a faint click. A portion of the wall, about 2 feet wide, recessed slightly. "No way," she whispered. Cautiously, she pushed against the recessed section. It swung inward, revealing a narrow, dark space beyond. The hidden door had been papered over to match the hallway, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Sarah retrieved her phone and turned on its flashlight. The beam illuminated a small room, no larger than a walk-in closet. The space was empty except for a child-sized rocking chair in one corner and a trunk against the wall. The air inside was stale and cold. Much colder than the rest of the house. Sarah stepped in, her heart pounding. The room had no windows, no other doors, just blank walls, peeling wallpaper with a faded floral pattern, and a ceiling that sloped with the roofline. She approached the trunk, which was secured with a rusted padlock. Next to it lay what appeared to be an old-fashioned diary, its leather cover cracked with age. Sarah picked it up carefully and opened to the first page. Property of Eleanor Matthews, 1908. Sarah's hands trembled as she turned the brittle pages. The diary entries began in January 1908, chronicling the daily life of a young woman in her 20s. Eleanor wrote about household duties, social calls, and her growing concern about her brother's business troubles. March 12, 1908. William's investments have failed completely. He came home in such a state today, I feared for his health. The bank is threatening to take everything. He says we shall lose the house unless a miracle occurs. I suggested selling Mother's jewelry, but he flew into a rage at the very idea. "That is your inheritance," he said. "I would sooner see us on the street than rob you of what is rightfully yours. But what good is jewelry if we have no home? I shall speak to him again when he is calmer." The entries continued, describing William's deteriorating mental state and Eleanor's increasing fear. Then came an entry that made Sarah's blood run cold. April 18th, 1908. It is done. William has solved our financial troubles, but at what cost to his soul? Last night, a man came to the house after the children were asleep. They spoke in the study for hours. When the man left, William came to my room, his eyes wild with a terrible excitement. "We are saved," he told me. "Mr. Blackwood has arranged everything. The bank will not foreclose." When I asked how this miracle had occurred, William would say only that he had offered Mr. Blackwood Something of great value. I fear he has made a terrible bargain. When I pressed him further, he grew angry and said some things must remain private, even from family. I do not trust this Mr. Blackwood. There is something in his eyes that chills me to the bone." Sarah paused. Blackwood, the same name as the law firm that had contacted her about the inheritance. Could it be the same family? The diary entries continued, growing increasingly disturbing. May 1st, 1908. William insists we must have a family portrait taken tomorrow. He has arranged for a photographer to come to the house. When I asked why the sudden urgency, he said only that it is necessary for the arrangement. The children are excited. Little Thomas has even polished his own shoes for the occasion. I still do not understand what bargain my brother has made, but I am certain now that Mr. Blackwood is not what he appears to be. Yesterday I saw him leaving William's study, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something else beneath his human form, something dark and misshapen. When he smiled at me, his teeth seemed too numerous, too sharp. I must be imagining things. The strain of our financial worries has affected my nerves. The next entry was dated May 3rd, 1908, the day after the portrait was taken. May 3rd, 1908, I have discovered the truth, God help me. Last night, I overheard William and Mr. Blackwood in the study. The arrangement they made was not with any bank. The money that saved our home came from somewhere else entirely. The portrait was the final piece. A binding, Mr. Blackwood called it. One life suspended between worlds to ensure the family's prosperity for generations. And William agreed. My own brother sacrificed me for this house. They know I overheard them. William came to my room this morning with tea. Tea he insisted on pouring himself. It tasted bitter. Within minutes, I felt strangely tired. Now I understand his plan. The hidden room has been prepared. By the time anyone thinks to look for me, it will be too late. I write this in haste, hiding in the servants' quarters while the household sleeps. Soon they will realize I am not in my bed. William will come looking for me. If anyone ever finds this diary, know that I, Eleanor Matthews, did not leave this house as my brother will surely claim. I'm to be sealed away, my life force bound to this place through some dark magic I cannot comprehend. The portrait is the key. My image there is not truly me. It is something else, something created by Mr. Blackwood's ritual. William plans to tell everyone I have gone to stay with cousins in Boston. No one will question it. No one will look for me. I hear footsteps on the stairs. He's coming. The diary ended there. The remaining pages were blank. Sarah sat on the floor of the hidden room, the diary in her lap, trying to process what she had just read. It sounded impossible. Dark magic, a woman imprisoned, a bargain for prosperity. And yet, here was the hidden room, exactly where it shouldn't be. Here was the diary, written in a hand that matched the era. And then there was the portrait, with eyes that seemed to open and close. The trunk. Sarah turned her attention to the padlocked chest. Whatever was inside might confirm or disprove the fantastic tale in Eleanor's diary. She examined the lock, old and rusted but potentially breakable with the right tools. She left the hidden room, leaving the door ajar, and went downstairs to search for something she could use to break the lock. In the kitchen, she found a toolbox under the sink. Among the tools was a small crowbar. As Sarah started back upstairs, she passed the family portrait on the wall. She stopped cold. Eleanor's place in the photograph was empty. The woman who had been standing in the back row was gone, leaving a gap between two other family members. Sarah's hands shook as she took out her phone and snapped another photo. In the digital image, Eleanor was still there, her eyes open and seeming to look directly at Sarah. But in the actual portrait on the wall, Eleanor had vanished. "This isn't possible," Sarah whispered. Yet the evidence was right before her eyes. She hurried back to the hidden room, crowbar in hand. The temperature had dropped even further. Sarah could see her breath fogging in the air. She approached the trunk and worked the end of the crowbar into the hasp of the padlock. With a sharp twist and a crack of rusted metal. The lock broke open. Sarah hesitated, suddenly afraid of what she might find inside. Then, steeling herself, she lifted the lid. The trunk contained a woman's clothing. A high-necked dress of dark blue fabric, undergarments and high-button shoes, all consistent with fashion from the early 1900s. Beneath the clothing lay a jewelry box containing several pieces of what appeared to be valuable jewelry, pearl necklaces, diamond earrings, and a particularly stunning sapphire ring. "Mother's jewelry," Sarah murmured, remembering the diary entry. "Her inheritance." Nay, at the very bottom of the trunk, wrapped in yellowed newspaper dated May 2nd, 1908, was a small, leather-bound book. Sarah unwrapped it carefully. It wasn't another diary, but what appeared to be a book of occult rituals. The pages were filled with strange symbols, Latin phrases, and detailed instructions for various ceremonies. Several pages had been dog-eared. One marked section was titled "The Binding of Souls," and described a ritual to trap a human soul between life and death, using it as an anchor for prosperity spells. The ritual required a blood sacrifice, a photographic image of the victim, and a hidden space where the victim's possessions would be stored. Sarah felt sick. According to this book and Eleanor's diary, her great-great-grandfather had sacrificed his own sister for financial gain, had trapped her soul somehow, using this bizarre ritual. And if the diary and the strange phenomena with the portrait were to be believed, Eleanor was still here, caught between worlds for over 100 years. A soft sound from behind made Sarah turn. Standing in the doorway of the hidden room was a figure, the translucent outline of a woman in early 1900s dress. Her face matched the woman in the portrait, Eleanor. Sarah scrambled backward until she hit the wall, the occult book clutched to her chest like a shield. The spectral figure of Eleanor Matthews stood motionless in the doorway, her form translucent yet distinct. Her eyes, the same eyes that had appeared to blink in the portrait, gazed at Sarah with a terrible sadness. "You're real," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible even in the small room's confines. The ghost made no sound, but her lips moved, forming words Sarah couldn't hear. Then Eleanor raised her arm, pointing toward the trunk. Sarah looked back at the trunk, then at the ghost. "The jewelry! Is that what you want?" Eleanor shook her head slowly. She pointed again, more insistently. Understanding dawned on Sarah. "The book. You want me to use the book?" The ghost nodded, her expression urgent. Sarah looked down at the occult tome in her hands. "To undo what was done to you? To break the binding?" Again, Eleanor nodded. She drifted closer, her form causing the temperature to plummet further. Sarah could now see details she'd missed at first. The ghost bore signs of violence, bruises around her neck, a dark stain on the side of her dress that could only be blood. "He killed you," Sarah realized aloud. "William didn't just trap your soul, he murdered you." Eleanor's ghost raised her hands to her throat, mimicking strangulation. Then she pointed downward, toward the floor. "You're buried here? In the house?" Sarah's voice rose with horror. The ghost nodded once more. Sarah's mind raced. If what she was seeing was real, and how could she deny it with the evidence right before her eyes? Then her entire family fortune, the house itself, had been built on murder and some kind of dark magic. Her great-great-grandfather had killed his sister and used her soul as a supernatural anchor for the family's prosperity. And her great-aunt Eliza had discovered the truth before she died. That's what the journal entries had been about. Eliza realizing that Eleanor was somehow trapped in the portrait, trying to communicate. "I'll help you," Sarah said, meeting the ghost's gaze. "Tell me what to do." Eleanor pointed to the book again, then made a tearing motion with her hands. Sarah flipped through the occult tome until she found a section titled "Breaking Bindings." The ritual described was complex, requiring specific items and timing. "I need to find these things," Sarah said, reading the list. "Salt, candles, something of yours. I guess I have that. And..." She paused, her blood running cold. "Blood of the caster's bloodline." She looked up at Eleanor. William's blood. My blood. The ghost nodded solemnly. And it has to be done at midnight, in the place where the binding was sealed. Sarah glanced around the small room. Here, I'm guessing. Eleanor shook her head. She pointed downward again, more emphatically. Not here. Below here. Sarah tried to recall the layout of the house. The room below this would be the study? The ghost nodded vigorously. Of course. Eleanor's diary had mentioned overhearing William and Mr. Blackwood in the study. That must have been where the ritual took place. Tonight? Sarah asked. At midnight? Eleanor nodded again, then suddenly turned her head sharply, as if hearing something Sarah couldn't. The ghost's form flickered like a candle in a draught. She gave Sarah one last urgent look before fading from view entirely. The temperature in the room gradually returned to normal. Sarah sat alone, surrounded by the contents of the trunk, the occult book open on her lap. She checked her phone. 3:17 p.m. Less than 9 hours until midnight. She had preparations to make. Sarah spent the afternoon gathering the items needed for the ritual. She found candles in a drawer in the dining room and salt in the kitchen. For the blood of the caster's bloodline, she would have to use her own, a prospect that made her queasy, but one she accepted as necessary. As she worked, Sarah couldn't help wondering if she was losing her mind. Ghosts weren't real. Magic wasn't real. Yet she had seen Eleanor with her own eyes, had watched the woman vanish from the portrait, had discovered a hidden room exactly where her great-aunt's journal suggested it would be. Either this was all happening, or Sarah was experiencing some kind of psychotic break, and if it was the latter, what harm would there be in performing a ritual that wouldn't work anyway? At 11:30 p.m., Sarah entered the study carrying a bag containing the ritual items. She had changed into comfortable clothes and tied her hair back. The occult book was tucked under her arm. The study was dominated by a large desk and bookshelves lining the walls. A Persian rug covered most of the hardwood floor. Sarah rolled up the rug, revealing wide floorboards underneath. She examined them carefully, looking for any sign of a hidden compartment or space. In the center of the room, she noticed one board that seemed slightly different from the others. Its grain pattern didn't quite match, and the nails securing it looked newer than those in the surrounding boards. Using a letter opener from the desk, Sarah pried up the board. Beneath it was a small cavity in the floor. Inside lay a cloth bundle tied with twine. Sarah unwrapped it carefully. The bundle contained a small leather pouch, a lock of dark hair tied with ribbon, and a yellowed piece of paper covered in the same strange symbols she had seen in the occult book. The hair must have been Eleanor's, preserved as part of the original binding ritual. The pouch, when opened, revealed a fine grey powder that Sarah didn't want to identify too closely. The paper appeared to be the original spell used to bind Eleanor's soul. According to the book, to break a binding, one needed to reverse the original ritual. Sarah placed the items back in the cavity and began setting up her own ritual components around it. She created a circle of salt, positioned candles at 4 points around the circle, and placed Eleanor's diary and the sapphire ring from the trunk in the center, next to the original binding materials. Then she opened the occult book to the breaking ritual page and began to read the Latin phrases written there. The candles flared higher as she spoke, though there was no draught in the room. The air grew colder. Sarah continued reading, her voice growing stronger as she progressed through the ritual. When she reached the part requiring blood, she hesitated only briefly before using the letter opener to make a small cut on her palm. She let several drops fall into the cavity, onto the original binding materials. "Blood of the bloodline," she recited, "to undo what blood has done." Undo. The moment her blood touched the binding materials, the candles blazed blue. A wind that couldn't possibly exist indoors whipped through the room, scattering papers from the desk. The temperature plummeted so rapidly that frost formed on the windows. Sarah continued reading, fighting against the supernatural wind, her voice nearly drowned out by a high-pitched keening that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The portrait. She suddenly remembered the portrait on the staircase, the anchor for Eleanor's trapped soul. According to the book, breaking the binding required destroying the anchor. Sarah grabbed one of the candles and ran from the study to the staircase. The portrait hung there, and in it Eleanor's image had returned, her face contorted in what looked like pain, her mouth open in a silent scream. Without hesitation, Sarah held the candle flame to the corner of the portrait. The old, dry frame and canvas caught immediately. As the fire spread across the image, the keening sound grew louder, becoming an agonized wail that reverberated through the entire house. The floor beneath Sarah's feet began to tremble. Plaster cracked and fell from the ceiling. It felt as if the entire house was coming apart. Sarah stumbled back to the study, where the ritual components were now floating above the cavity in the floor, suspended in a column of blue-white light. The original binding materials, the hair, the pouch, the spelled paper, were burning with an unnatural fire that consumed them without smoke. As the last of the binding materials turned to ash, the light intensified to a blinding flash. Sarah shielded her eyes. When she looked again, the light was gone, the ritual components had fallen back into the cavity, and standing before her was Eleanor Matthews, not as a ghost now, but as a luminous, fully formed spirit. Eleanor's face was peaceful, the signs of violence gone from her form. She smiled at Sarah and mouthed what looked like, "Thank you." Then she looked upward, her expression one of wonder and relief, before her form dissolved into particles of light that drifted upward and faded away. The house gave one final violent shudder. Somewhere above, there was a tremendous crash. Sarah ran from the study just in time to see a massive crack forming along the ceiling of the main hallway. The house was collapsing. She grabbed her phone and bag and fled through the front door, barely making it to the sidewalk before the first sections of the roof caved in. Sarah watched in horror and awe as the house, the physical manifestation of her family's ill-gotten prosperity, literally fell in on itself. By the time emergency vehicles arrived, drawn by calls from concerned neighbors, the once Grand Victorian was little more than a pile of rubble. Sarah stood across the street, shivering in the November night, and told the authorities she had been awakened by strange noises and had fled the house just before it collapsed. In the days that followed, structural engineers would determine that the house had been compromised by previously undetected foundation issues and aging support beams. No one suspected that the true cause was the breaking of a supernatural contract that had sustained the building for over a century. Sarah checked into a hotel, while insurance assessors evaluated the ruins. In her bag, she had Eleanor's diary, the sapphire ring, and the occult book, the only items she had managed to save from the house. 1 week after the collapse, Mr. Blackwood requested a meeting. They sat in the law firm's conference room, the attorney's face grave. "This is most unfortunate," he said. "The insurance will cover some of the loss, but I'm afraid the house itself, the primary asset of your inheritance, is gone." "Yes," Sarah replied simply. Mr. Blackwood adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, studying her with an intensity that made Sarah uncomfortable. "There is something else you should know, Miss Matthews. The firm of Blackwood, Thorne and Associates has represented your family for generations, since 1908 to be precise." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. "Since 1908, when the original Mr. Blackwood made an arrangement with my great-great-grandfather?" The attorney's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "You've been doing some research, I see." "I found Eleanor's diary," Sarah said bluntly. "I know what William did to her. I know about the binding." Mr. Blackwood was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed and removed his glasses. "What's done is done, Miss Matthews. The binding has been broken. The prosperity it brought your family has ended. The house was merely the physical manifestation of that prosperity." "You knew," Sarah said, her voice hard. "All this time, your family has known what happened to Eleanor." "My family has served yours for generations," he replied, his tone neutral. "We merely facilitated an arrangement." "An arrangement? William Matthews murdered his sister and used black magic to trap her soul. And your ancestor helped him do it." Mr. Blackwood replaced his glasses. "The past is the past, Miss Matthews. What concerns us now is your future. Without the binding, without the house, your inheritance is substantially reduced. There are some investments, of course, and the insurance payout, but nothing like what might have been." "I don't want blood money," Sarah said firmly. "Nevertheless, it is yours." Mr. Blackwood slid a folder across the table. "These are the documents transferring the remaining assets to your name. Approximately $90,000, all told." Sarah stared at the folder. It was far less than a historic house would be worth, but more money than she had ever had at once. Money she could use to pay off her student loans, to start fresh. Money paid for with Eleanor's suffering. "Donate it," she said suddenly, "all of it, to a women's shelter in Cleveland, in Eleanor Matthews' name." Mr. Blackwood raised an eyebrow. "Are you certain that is a significant sum to simply give away?" "I'm certain," Sarah replied. "I want nothing to do with it. Set up the donation, send me the paperwork to sign, and then our business is concluded." The attorney studied her face, then nodded slowly. "As you wish, Miss Matthews. Though I must say, your decision would disappoint William greatly. He sacrificed much to ensure his family's prosperity." "He sacrificed his sister," Sarah corrected, "not himself. And now that sacrifice has been undone." As Sarah left the law firm for the last time, she felt lighter than she had in days. The sapphire ring and Eleanor's diary were in her bag, the only thing she would take from this strange inheritance. The occult book she had already destroyed, burning it page by page in the hotel room's bathroom sink. She had one more stop to make before leaving Cleveland. At a small jewelry store downtown, she had the sapphire ring appraised. As she suspected, it was valuable, worth enough to make a modest, fresh start. "It's quite old," the jeweler told her. "Early 20th century, excellent craftsmanship. Where did you get it?" "It was my great-great-aunt's," Sarah replied. "It's the only thing of hers I have left." That night, as Sarah packed for her flight back to Portland, she took out Eleanor's diary one last time. She had debated what to do with it. Destroy it like the occult book, donate it to a historical society, keep it as a reminder. In the end, she decided to keep it. Eleanor deserved to have her story remembered, her truth preserved. Sarah would be the keeper of that truth, the one person who knew what had really happened in that house in 1908. As she closed the diary and placed it carefully in her suitcase, Sarah thought she felt a gentle touch on her shoulder, like a hand resting there briefly in gratitude. The air in the hotel room seemed to warm slightly, carrying the faint scent of lavender perfume from a bygone era. "Rest in peace, Eleanor," Sarah whispered. "You're free now." Outside her window, the first snow of winter began to fall on Cleveland, covering the ruins of the Matthews house in a blanket of pristine white, as if nature itself was trying to cleanse the ground of its dark history. Sarah turned away from the window and finished packing. Tomorrow she would return to her life in Portland, forever changed by what she had discovered and what she had done. She had broken a chain of prosperity built on suffering, had righted a century-old wrong, and somewhere beyond the veil that separates this world from whatever comes next, Eleanor Matthews was finally at peace.